everyone. Welcome to the Backstage Classical Career Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Katrina Stroud, and I'm a classical violinist who started playing at the age of 3. I graduated from the Robert McDuffie Center for Strings at Mercer University with my bachelor's in violin performance, and I'm pursuing my master's in music at the University of Michigan. In this series, I invite esteemed classical musicians onto the show and interview them to tell their stories and give advice to share with others and preserve their legacies. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Nathan Cole, Concertmaster of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Mr. Cole grew up in a musical family in Lexington, Kentucky, and both of his parents were flutists and taught lessons in the home while his grandfather told stories about his years in the Philadelphia Orchestra. Mr. Cole attended the Curtis Institute of Music, where his primary teachers were Pamela Frank, Felix Gallimere, Ida Kavafian, and Jamie Laredo. He was the first associate concertmaster of the Los Angeles Philharmonic for 13 years, and prior to this position, he was principal second violin of the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra and a member of the Chicago Symphony. Mr. Cole joined the Boston Symphony Orchestra as concertmaster in 2024. As an educator, Mr. Cole leads the orchestral repertoire program for violin at the Colburn Conservatory, while his innovative online programs allow him to work with thousands of players around the globe. Thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast. I'm very honored to have you here. So on your website, you say that both of your parents were flute teachers. What made you choose the violin?
Well, the way they tell it is that as I was growing up, all their friends, everybody that I saw around played an instrument. And so I just assumed that everybody played an instrument. And so at some point, I guess when I was 3 or 4, I started asking, what's my instrument? And so they gave me the violin. I don't know if that's actually how it happened, but they also say that they definitely, as flutists, they definitely did not want me playing any instrument that would be ever in a marching band. They did not want me to have to go through marching band like they did.
That's funny. My mother was also a flutist, and she also chose the violin for me. So maybe there's something to that.
Yeah, they like the trouble.
Yeah. So who were some of your role models growing up?
Besides my parents, because I saw them the most and wanted to have fun playing instruments and meeting people and performing. I liked performing when I was a kid. Then it would be just the people whose recordings we had around. My parents got me lots of Itzhak Perlman because he was on TV too. So Perlman for sure. When I got to be a teenager and I started studying with a teacher who had studied with Heifetz, then Heifetz was everything. I did, Heifetz recording for anything I was working on. And also I should mention my father's father. He was also a flutist. He was in the Philadelphia Orchestra. And so my father had the teaching career. My grandfather had performing and then eventually teaching. And so at a certain point, I figured I wanted some mix of all that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then you eventually went to the Curtis School of Music. Do you have any memorable stories about chamber music from that time?
Oh, yeah. All kinds. I'll try to try to limit it. I mean, I think the biggest thing there was that, I'm coming into a time in life where, I'm trying to come up with my own ideas, right? You go through so many phases. You try to do what your teacher says. You try to imitate what you hear on recordings. Eventually, you feel like you need to be coming up with your own things. And combined with that age, 18, 19 years old, it's definitely can be a headstrong time. And so you're sitting down in a group with these other people and everybody, either some groups, everybody has their own ideas and you have to really fight it out. And other groups, it seems like nobody wants to say anything. We had a coach who also was one of my 2 teachers when I started at Curtis, Felix Gallimere, and that for people just in school now or just leaving school, they won't have had the chance to work with him because he was already in his mid-80s when I started working with him, which means that he knew, like he played the Ravel string quartet with Ravel. Their coaching and conducting, they made their first recording. I mean, he knew Berg and Schoenberg, and it's just a connection to a much different world. And I think he couldn't really understand me or where I was coming from. I'd had this comfortable, sheltered life. He'd had to flee the Nazis, and he'd worked with all the composers, maybe not Beethoven, that we were playing. And so just he was always good-natured yelling was his usual mode of communication. So yeah, I mean, one time we had a string quartet playing a Haydn. I can't remember which Haydn, but we had gone up to New York to play for him in his apartment. So kind of a smaller room, and we were not sort of scaling any of our dynamics for a smaller room. We wanted to go for the maximum contrast, and so quiets were like this, and all the fortes were huge. And so at one point, when we played a big forte chord, he jumped up out of his chair and went, "Oh!" And we were, "What is he doing?" And he said, "Why are you shouting at me?" And he's like, "In this music, piano and forte are next door neighbors,"
Hmm.
which was true because he there were no mezzos. It was only piano and forte, and it just not every contrast had to be so extreme. So
Yeah, that's an amazing connection to history for sure, with those composers. And so you eventually became principal second violin of the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. Were auditions different for a conductorless orchestra, and how were rehearsals different?
the audition, as I remember it, that was only the second audition I took, so I didn't have a lot to compare it to. But thinking back, it was mostly the same, except that there was chamber music at the end in the final round. And some orchestras will do that now, even for a section string position. I think they did it for all their auditions, at least back then. And it was also, they hadn't told me what to prepare. It was just, read. It was mostly second violin parts, I think, since this was a principal second audition. But I loved that aspect of the audition, actually. That's where I felt most comfortable.
Mhm.
So in that sense, it was different. The repertoire, the list was smaller, and it was
Mm,
made up of some different things. So the Dvorak Serenade for Strings was on there, and that's never on a big
mhm,
orchestra list. And a couple concertmaster solos, even such as the Bourgeois Gentilhomme from Strauss, that was on there. Rehearsals could be quite different. Particularly, there were maybe 2 weeks a season back then, at least. I don't know how it is now for that group, but maybe 2 weeks a season where we would play conductorless. And then, as you can imagine, it's completely different.
mhm.
The concertmaster naturally takes the biggest leading role, but all the principals definitely had a lot to say, and even section players. It wasn't everybody shouting out their ideas, but there was a lot more participation than there could ever be in a 100-piece symphony.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And your wife is also a violinist. So, how have you two navigated marriage and raising a family as two busy musicians?
Yeah, it's definitely you got to navigate it. It's a good word.
Mhm.
No, Akiko's been amazing. We used to have a podcast that we're actually starting back up again called Stand
Nice.
Partners for Life, and it's definitely you know you have to be if you're both performing, you have to be partners in music, whether you're on stage or just supporting each other and in everything else. And we have 3 kids still at home, so it's a lot, and there's no such thing as a life without compromises and decisions that you have to make. So, for example, even moving from Los Angeles to Boston, I mean, these are things that had to be talked about in light of both career and family. But Akiko was most recently assistant concertmaster in the LA Phil, and so she's been right there with me there and in the Chicago Symphony too. So it is great to share that aspect of our lives together too.
Yeah. And do you guys ever help each other with violin things?
We do, yeah. I mean, everything from just the casual, like, hey, what, it sounds silly, but it's like, hey, what fingering do you do for this? What do you even? I'm preparing Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante for violin and viola soon with the Boston Symphony, and just over lunch I was like, hey, do you set that up or a down bow? Because it's kind of 50-50 from what I see online. Or everything from that to, okay, I'm taking an audition. Will you listen to everything? And we got to be tough with each other, and she's definitely the toughest critic I have. And I know if I can sneak something past her, then probably it'll work for anybody else.
Mhm. Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. So, you were obviously in the LA Philharmonic for a while. Is there a particular concert that you played that stood out to you?
So many. You know, one for sure was, well, it's a piece that we actually took on tour. I had not ever played the complete Beethoven opera Fidelio. A lot of times folks will play the overture from that or one of the overtures from that when it was, called Leonore. So a lot of times it even used to be on audition lists a lot. Leonore overture number 2 or number 3 because he couldn't ever be satisfied with the overture he'd written. But when he wrote the whole thing, he called it Fidelio, and we took that piece on tour with a deaf theater company. Since Beethoven would have been deaf, writing and hearing this music, every character on stage, every singing character had a signing character, a deaf actor next to them in costume signing everything. And for the recitative sections, instead of them being spoken or sung, they were acted. They were signed in silence. And we actually had uh, quite a large number of non-hearing folks in the audience, both in LA and on tour, and it was very powerful,
Yeah.
especially those scenes where there was no sound and everybody for a few minutes was in the same world.
Wow, that seems like an amazing collaboration. I didn't know they did that, but that's amazing. And the LA Phil commissions so many new works. What do you think the importance of that is in classical music and progressing classical music into modern day society?
Well, I mean, it's essential. I do love playing the classics, familiar pieces, understanding the power that they have, transmitting that to listeners. But without new work, without new material, that's the only way that we really could be a dying art form. And one of there are so many essential things about commissioning new works and playing new works, but one of the most important for me is just understanding the process of working with composers and how often they're really on the same page as you. I think
Mhm.
when we open up a score of Beethoven or Brahms or Mozart, we think we have to follow every last marking in there, and we can only do what's in there as if that was a reality even. We can only do what's in there, we can't add anything extra, we can't take anything away. When you work with living composers, they're often quite willing, to change things to make something more effective. They'll say, "Oh, I wrote this, but what I meant was that." "Oh, now that I've heard it a few times, let's change it to this. Oh, now that you've performed it, I'm realizing this is." So these pieces that we think are set in stone might very well have been changed if Beethoven, for example, had been able to hear a performance of one of his pieces, or if he would be able to hear it today on modern instruments and in modern halls. So um, I appreciate realizing that this music, it lives and it breathes, and it's only as effective as it can be transmitted to the listeners, and that it's never just dead on a page.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really great take on new music, and I also really enjoy working with living composers, and yeah, that collaboration between them and the musician is really special. So, you spent so many years in the LA Phil. What made you decide to take that audition at the Boston Symphony?
Well, I had wanted for many years to be in the concertmaster seat, and I had imagined for a while doing that job and taking on those responsibilities, and I wanted the chance to do it. And so I took several concertmaster auditions for big groups, and you know, Boston had a special draw for me because of, well, for a number of reasons. I mean, the tradition of excellence there, the hall is maybe my favorite hall in the US.
Mhm,
It's where Akiko went to school in the Boston area, and Boston Symphony has the Boston Symphony chamber players. So
mhm.
I get to be artistic director of that group as well. So none of that would have mattered if the audition hadn't gone my way. A number of other ones hadn't, but that's why you keep trying if that's what your dream is.
Yeah, and what was that audition like as a seasoned musician, and how did you prepare for it?
Yeah, there are things that get easier taking auditions once you've done a number of them. For one thing, I had hardly any music that I had to learn for this particular audition. There may have been one or two small things, So that's nice. You know what your successful and maybe unsuccessful bowings and fingerings are for
Mhm.
all the material. You've tested this material under stress and extreme pressure before, so you know what's likely to happen. Harder things about auditioning as you get older are that you're getting older, and it just it's harder it's harder to, physically and mentally stay sharp at age, in my mid-20s as I am now. No, as I get closer to 50, than it was in my 20s. Also, the life changes too. When I was in school or right out of school, I had nothing better and nothing more to do than practice if I was
Mhm.
motivated to do that. As you get older, you might have other responsibilities. Having a job is great, don't get me wrong, but if you're taking an audition while you're playing in an orchestra, that's a lot of playing and wear and tear that's part of the job, and then
Yeah.
you need to be motivated and carve out the time after that to practice so that you're not neglecting your core responsibilities. So we mentioned Akiko and family earlier. It has to be a whole family project, one of these auditions, because if I'm not spending time with the kids because I'm out practicing, guess who gets to do it and drive kids around and cook more and all of that stuff. So everybody has to be on board with it. And that's good motivation to do your best work when you're out there, not to waste time.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great insight for sure. And so you've been a member of multiple orchestras now. What are some differences between orchestras that people may not know or think about?
Yeah, there are a few, and one big one has to do with the halls that they play in. I've been a member of three, what you'd call big symphony orchestras now: Chicago, L.A., and Boston, and those halls are so different.
Mm.
Chicago, I remember the first time auditioning in there, getting out there, and I'm in the middle of this big hall, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, I'm gonna play the first note of the Brahms concerto, and it's just gonna, it's gonna ricochet around the whole hall, and it's gonna just be huge." And it sounded like, and I got nothing back. And
Yeah.
your first instinct, I was like, "Oh," and, now I gotta dig in, and, you have to get used to playing in that hall and trusting that actually people can hear what happens, and they can especially hear if you're pressing. That's the quality that's gonna come out.
Mm.
But what it meant for the orchestra is that things needed to be sustained really to the end of the note, and you had to create your own sort of bloom and your own taper at the end of notes. So if you wanted it to sound bum, then you had to play it exactly like that. Kind of at the other extreme is Boston's Symphony Hall, where if you play a short note, bum, what actually comes out is bum, because
Hmm.
the hall has a several second reverb. LA reverb wise would be somewhere in the middle of those two. And then there are all kinds of other, you know, the ways people hear on stage, the mix that the audience hears. So the orchestras can play quite differently. I had to get used to just backing off a little bit coming from Chicago to LA and not needing to feel like I was completely in the string all the time. And so your own playing changes as a response. So between that and the different programming of the different groups, that combined with whoever's music director, that those things largely make up the character, the current character of any orchestra. And then there's the sort of institutional memory. Like if two-thirds of the players in an orchestra were hired by the previous music director, they're actually going to have much more of that DNA than that of the current music director. So they're
Yeah.
living organisms too.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've always heard that different orchestras have different styles of playing, and I've never connected that part of that reason is because of the halls. So that's very good to know.
I would say just one more thing about that. In previous generations, going back, like say 50 years or more, orchestras did used to sound much more different from one another, much more distinct, and that was largely because they tended to be more local
Mm.
affairs. If there was a vacancy in the violin section, in 1960, you weren't necessarily holding an international audition. It would just, whoever was concertmaster or whoever the music director knew would, they'd talk to someone and say, "Do you have anybody promising?" "Oh yeah, it's one of my students." Or not that every hire was necessarily like that, but back then that was seen as desirable. Like, oh, we're going to kind of keep this in the family. We're going to
Mm.
all have a similar style because we all studied with the same teachers. And then you go, okay, halfway across the country, we've got our own style because there's a different school here and we've got different teachers. Now that shut out the vast majority of people from joining those groups.
Yeah.
Um, but it explains why these orchestras used to have more distinct characters as
Mm.
compared to today.
Very interesting. I see. Yeah. And speaking about auditions a little bit, I'm sure you've been on numerous audition panels. What is something that makes a player stand out in an audition?
Well, I mean, in the end, it's the word I like to use is trust. Do I, as the committee member, whether I would say it this way consciously or not, the unconscious feeling that I'm looking for is, do I trust this player? Do they seem to me like we're speaking the same language? Now that can be a very vague thing, but in a final round, that is what makes someone stand out. That they are comfortable enough with the music and with being able to express themselves that we, the committee members, can forget about the X's and O's and the dots and dashes and all of that. And it's a joy when you can hear somebody play that way. That is very hard to do under such extreme pressure because, of course, even recently I've been on the other side where I'm the one auditioning, and I don't ever feel like I've played my very best under those conditions. I always
Mhm.
feel like I've left something on the table. So when I'm the one listening, I'm staying aware of that. I'm listening for the potential and the overall presentation. That's in the finals. If we're talking about the first couple rounds, standing out is great, but you will set yourself apart just by playing in tune with a beautiful sound and good rhythm. That's just very hard to do on the violin or any string instrument, as we
Mhm.
know.
Yes. Yeah, that's very good to know. And I do love that idea of trust. And I feel like it gives a little bit more comfort to the player knowing that rather than just, yeah, it has to be perfect, having all those other thoughts in your head.
Definitely.
This is just a question that I have for fun, but do you have a favorite seat in the orchestra?
Well, right now it's where I sit because it's relatively new to me. I got to play, maybe 10 to 12 weeks as concertmaster per season in LA. But for the last year and a half, two seasons, I've been sitting only in the concertmaster seat, and so that's been a lot of fun. You're right next to the conductor, for better or worse, but you do hear basically the same balance that they do. So
Mm,
in that seat, I feel like I'm able to help. Not that I'm going to be pointing to the conductor and saying, "Hey, listen for the horns." But I do feel like I can at least understand what it is they're hearing. From
mhm.
there, I have eye contact with the other principals, not only in the strings but throughout the orchestra. That's a fun place to be. And Akiko says the same thing. She's gotten to play some concertmaster as well, or even guesting. And we both, in some ways, think it's easier to sit up front
Mm,
because it just there's no delay. All the reactions are immediate. Sitting in the back, as I did all the time in Chicago, I mean, you have to divide your attention. So you almost have to have the music memorized so that you can always be looking up and seeing what's going on and trying to anticipate. You can't hear the balance the way that the conductor does. So when they say, "Oh, this is too much and this is not enough," to you, it doesn't might not make any sense because it's not what you're hearing. So that can be a tough place to be.
yeah, I definitely agree. I've, sat around all over the section in orchestras and school ensembles and festival ensembles, and it definitely is harder to play in the back for sure. And I was recently asked this question, what is the role of a concertmaster? And I couldn't really articulate it very well, so I was wondering what you think the role of a concertmaster is as a, prestigious concertmaster.
And now I've had to answer this question so many times in the last couple years, and I'm with you. I'm not sure that I still have the tidy elevator answer, but ambassador is the word. I like to have these one word answers. Ambassador is the word that I think of. So mostly two ways between conductor and the orchestra. So in terms of from the conductor through me to the orchestra, that means that depending on who's up there, they may need or want my help translating their ideas. For example, in Boston, Anders Nelson's is a great music director. He is not a string player. And unlike many other conductors I've known, he does not pretend to be. He does not pretend that he knows every detail of string playing. And he relies on us, not only me as concertmaster, but all of us really to bring the character out. And however, as concertmaster, it falls to me most often to unify, to say, like, okay, this is what we're going for. This is where it needs to be in the bow. So that's part of it. Helping manage energy is another aspect of it. If things are really tense on the podium for this reason or that, there are times when I need to channel that, and where everybody needs to know, like, we got to focus, get this done. Let's get together. Other times, I may need to diffuse that energy and to project something else for the section. If I feel that that sort of thing is not what's going to result in our best playing. And that can be through the way you sit and move. It can be through things you say. And then kind of going the other way, representing the orchestra to the conductor. I mean, everything from helping manage time when they ask about it. Some conductors will say, "Oh, do you think we should play this again or move on?" There's hardly ever a right answer, but it's often my job to say we need another try at that, because
Mhm.
we're just going to feel more comfortable that way, or we're good, let's move on. Doing it again would only. Those are some of the duties besides the bowings, which most people know about.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's a very good answer. Thank you. So, you have a very impressive website with an online course, as you mentioned, a podcast and a book, and a very vast social media following on Instagram and YouTube. What led you to pursue these entrepreneurial endeavors, and how did you develop your brand of Nate's Violin?
Well, the business and the branding, which are ultimately essential if you're going to sell something, which is what business is. That all came after the teaching part of it, and I think that's important. The reason that I went online in the first place was to help people that were coming to play lessons for me. I found that a lot of people would come to me to prepare audition stuff for a certain upcoming audition. So I might hear 10 or 15 people in a single week, all playing the same list of stuff. And I'd get frustrated with myself sometimes because I felt like I was saying the same things in every lesson. And then I realized, well, okay, that yeah, these may just be my particular things to say, but honestly, it does seem like everybody needs help on this certain thing. And I would
Mhm.
spend 10 minutes of every lesson working on that thing in that same way. And so I thought, why not make a 10-minute video and send it to everybody before they come to play for me? And then they could work on that and we wouldn't have to do it during our hour. But video files were so big to send around, I needed a place to store it and link it. And YouTube was new at that time. And so I would put it there just for the purpose of having a storage place and a link, really. But I didn't realize that, of course, other people might find it, because the idea of viral videos was not a thing back then. And none of my
Mhm.
videos have gone viral, just to be clear. But people would find a video on Schumann Scherzo or Don Juan, and they'd comment. And it blew my mind. I was like, really? Other people in other parts of the world are working on this right now? Like, I figured maybe 20 people in the world would be practicing Don Juan today, but instead it's like 20,000. Or they'd comment, "Hey, your fingering stinks here. You should do this." And in the early days, I'd get so offended and I want to reply, actually, I've practiced this a lot. And, the early days of the internet. But that's how it started. And from there, I realized I'd love to do more of this. Part of the motivation to spend more time on it is if it'll help do things for the family too. So that's how the business part of it started up. And mostly, I love helping people solve problems that they didn't see a solution for.
Yeah. And I've definitely used your videos, and I know a lot of my friends use your videos too. They're very helpful. So thank you for doing that. And so, what extent do you think social media and having an online presence is important for young musicians trying to start their careers today?
I don't know how to answer that question exactly because it's even, it's changed since I first got online and started using social media. I think what will always be important is the idea that your audience, whether it's a long-term audience that's going to follow you based on your website or your social media accounts, or the particular audience that you're playing for on a given evening, they are there to spend time with you, to hear you, to know more about you. And if you imagine that that extends not only to your musical performances, but to your social media and to the way you present yourself everywhere, it's actually it does you good in all those areas because it keeps you honest and genuine, and it connects your playing and your artistry to the rest of your life. It certainly made me more comfortable, for example, talking to an audience, and not because I feel like I have to, but because people, they've heard, if it's a famous piece, they've heard it before. They might have heard it 100 times before. Hopefully, they chose to come there and hear you play it. But even if they didn't, what they're going to come away with is not just how good or bad you are as a player, but their experience with you and that music. And so the more that you can let people in on that in social media or in email, if you write emails, the better, and the better effect it will have on your actual playing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think social media is allowing musicians to become a little more transparent with things we're all going through together, in this industry. So I think that's a really great thing that's happening.
Yes, I like being able to demystify. I think where it can get dangerous is the constant comparison, right? I mean, I've told other people this too, but I think if YouTube and Instagram had been around when I was a little kid, I think I would have quit. I
Mhm.
don't think I would have. It would have been so frustrating to see someone younger than me playing much better. I didn't have to
Yeah.
encounter that growing up in Kentucky. I didn't have to encounter that until I was basically in school already.
Mm.
And even then, it was just people in the room with me, not videos where, you know, can do endless takes to get something.
Yeah. Yeah. That is definitely a thing, but, I don't it's just I feel like it's so common these days that we're just like, "Oh, it's another kid who's better than me." Scroll past
Yeah.
it.
Well, if you can take it in that spirit, then so much the better. And again, yes, someone younger than you might be better than you, but they're not you. And,
Exactly.
there's only one you, and that's who people want to spend time with.
Yeah, exactly. So I always like to end with this one question. What advice do you have for aspiring professional musicians?
Oh, well, you may have gotten this answer before from someone else, but just to cherish and cultivate every person you meet in this world. I mean, sure, in the world at large would be great, but especially in the musical world, I still can't believe how small a world it is and how many connections resurface over decades now. There's so many people I wish I'd kept in touch with more, people I've lost, unfortunately, that I regret not spending more time with, not asking more questions of. So everybody you meet at music camps, even people you might meet online and correspond with, they will show up again in your life. And, there's not so much a warning like they're going to remember that mean thing you said. They might. But more importantly, you may find that you have more in common down the line, someone that you might not connect with so much right away. Don't write them off because things change, and in 10, 20 years your interests may be exactly aligned, and you'll be glad that you have them. Well, we used to say on speed dial, that doesn't so much exist anymore, but that you have that connection, and that you can say, oh, hey, remember when we talked last year, instead of remember me from 20 years ago in school.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice, just to keep the relationships alive.
Yeah, that's great advice. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight. This was a great interview.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I compliment you on that.
Thank you so much to Nathan Cole for joining me today for a very insightful interview about his impressive orchestral career. I think we can all be inspired by his journey through some of the best orchestras in the country and eventually to his dream position of concertmaster. To view the collection of his articles, videos, and courses, you can visit his website, natesviolin.com. Thank you so much for joining me on Backstage Classical Career Conversations. If you liked this interview, please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on the platform you're using. You can follow us at Backstage Classical Podcast on Instagram or visit the website at backstageclassicalpodcast.com for more episodes and information. I'm Katrina Stroud, and it was great to see you here. Until next time, stay inspired and listen to the stories of others.